Okay, guys, let's go ahead and go over muscular system 2. Go. Let's try that again. All right, so let's go ahead and fill in our blanks here. A nerve fiber with all the muscle fibers it innervates, connects to or goes through, that's what innervates means, is called a motor unit. All muscle fibers within a motor unit are stimulated all at once. What varies is the number of muscle fibers within a motor unit. The number of muscle fibers in a motor unit corresponds to the motor control. Okay, so the ocular muscles that move the eye have one motor neuron that innervates 23 muscle fibers. While the gastric nemus has one motor unit that innervates 1,000 muscle fibers. Okay, so what this means is the smaller the motor unit, then the more exact the muscle movement is. Okay, so if it has a smaller motor unit, then it has even more fine motor control. So if you think about that for a minute, think about your gastric nemus, which is that muscle in your calf. There's not a whole lot you're going to be doing with it. It's kind of going to flex or contract, relax or contract. But think about your eye muscles and all the little tiny movements that can be done in multiple directions with your eye muscle. So that means that you have fewer muscle fibers attached to your motor neuron in the motor unit. All right, following disorder with its description, fibromyalgia is C. Muscular dystrophy is E. Cramps, B. Myalgia, A. And sarcoma is D. Okay. All right, moving on. There we go. All right, so muscle energy demands. Muscles are high energy demand tissues, obviously because this is how our body moves, both voluntarily and involuntarily. So generates ATP using 4 types of energy molecules. So first we've got our glycogen. And then we have triglycerides. D. And these are stored in the muscle. And then we have our glucose and our fatty acids, the other version of glycogen and triglycerides. And this is circulating in the blood, these are. Okay, so what type of exercise is recommended for weight loss? So this, probably we should be looking at what is going to be the most efficient at being used, if you will, and then where that's being used. So it kind of looks like we've got peaks on our muscle glycogen and muscle triglycerides. So it's probably going to be this one that is most effective. Anything that's going to stimulate those. Okay. Sources for ATP, there's 3 different pathways that muscles can use to generate ATP. First one is called the creatine phosphate pathway. It happens really fast. This particular pathway is quick. And it's actually the first place that muscles are going to try to generate ATP. Okay. The problem is this doesn't produce much ATP. It's fast, but you don't get a lot. So really what you've got is the first 5 seconds, not minutes, but seconds of intense exercise, or the very beginning of your sub-max exercise. So it's really quick. Okay. The next pathway is fermentation. This is the second place muscles go. This is another one that is relatively fast acting, but again produces minimal ATP. Okay. Then of course we have cellular respiration. This is the last place muscles go, because compared to these other 2 pathways, cellular respiration is slow. However, it does produce a lot of ATP, which we know from our cellular respiration chapters. Remember that slow is a relative term here. Cellular respiration happens extremely fast, faster than we can comprehend, but compared to these other pathways, it's slow. The oxygen for the ATP, or for this process, comes from myoglobin. Similar to hemoglobin, but it's in the muscles. Okay. All right. So these first 2 pathways, the creatine phosphate and the fermentation, these are both anaerobic, meaning oxygen is not required. Part of what makes it so fast. Aerobic respiration, obviously, is cellular respiration. And we know that oxygen absolutely has to be there. It's that final electron acceptor. Okay. So now let's look at our fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers. We have these 2 different types. Each of them has their own strength, if you will. Okay. So when we look at fast twitch, we're looking at power This is something that is going to produce a lot of quick energy, or how do I put this? A lot of quick energy is used in fast twitch muscles. So things like our creatine phosphate pathway and fermentation, those are the sources that fast twitch muscles tend to go to. So the more anaerobic processes. So creatine phosphate and fermentation. If this is more anaerobic, which organelle would you think there would not be a lot of? This isn't using cellular respiration as much, so which organelle would not be found in as high numbers in fast twitch muscles? Well, anaerobic harvesting of energy means we don't need mitochondria, so we've got a lot fewer. Because this is mostly anaerobic with fewer mitochondria, fast twitch muscles have a light color. Because again, we don't need a whole lot of oxygen, we have less myoglobin. Again, myoglobin being what carries the oxygen. Fast twitch muscles have motor units with more fibers. This is like the gastrocnemius. Okay. And as we might expect, these muscles are quicker to fatigue. Again, we might expect this because we know that the creatine phosphate pathway and fermentation pathways that fast twitch muscles prefer provide a very fast source of power, but a very brief source of power. We don't get a lot of ATP and it doesn't last. Okay, so then we have our slow twitch, which is pretty much the opposite. Slow twitch is more of your endurance type muscles. And because this is endurance, we're definitely going to be more aerobic in it for the long haul, which means that we're fine using cellular respiration. Okay, and therefore, there are more mitochondria. More mitochondria means we need more oxygen for cellular respiration, which means that slow twitch muscle fibers have a darker color because of more, geez, that keeps looking like a V, more myoglobin. Okay. Slow twitch muscles generally have motor units with fewer fibers. So more fine control. And they don't fatigue as quickly. So your fast twitch muscles are going to be effective for things like, well, what's being shown here, we've got some weightlifting. That's because your fast twitch muscles give that quick, powerful burst of energy that lets your body perform these quick, short functions, okay? Whereas endurance and slow twitch is more like our runner that is pictured here. It's not something that you're just going to do real quick for a few seconds and be done. You have to do this over a prolonged period of time. Okay? Steroids. Let's go over those, shall we? So steroids, at least the type that we're going to be talking about, we're talking about anabolic. That's what's being shown here. Anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are essentially synthetic testosterone. And what it does is promotes the production of proteins. Proteins build muscles. In addition to that, it also creates an increase in motor units and glycogen availability, glycogen in the muscles. Okay. It does a few other things as well. It's mimicking a hormone. And so some of the other functions of steroids, as far as how anabolic steroids work, is tied into the hormone aspect. But since this section is on muscles, we're just focusing on the motor units and the glycogen and the protein production. Risks, high blood pressure, because it can increase your cholesterol. Jaundice, which is what happens when you're dealing with some liver damage, increased risk of cancer, acne, and violent mood swings, or what they would call roid rage. A lot of these side effects, and there are quite a few others. There's a lot of sexual side effects. Shrinkage, loss of function, things like that, because again, this is a synthetic testosterone. And so the body tries to compensate for the increase in testosterone. It realizes it has too much, and so it cuts back on its own production of it, which means that the person then ends up increasing the dosage of anabolic steroids they're taking, leading the body to again cut back on its natural testosterone production. So pretty soon you get into a really vicious loop that has all of these issues. And some of them, like the acne, mood swings, stuff like that, you kind of can associate with what's happening during puberty, because it is a secondary, well, actually in this case, it's a primary sexual hormone that is responsible for primary and secondary sexual characteristics. Okay. Botox. Botox comes from a bacteria. This should be botulinum toxin, but anyway, this is a bacteria. A bacteria that has this, well, toxin, right? This toxin blocks the release of acetylcholine from the motor neuron. So if you remember from the last lecture, when the motor neuron receives the action potential, it releases acetylcholine. And the acetylcholine has to bind to the receptors on the outside of the muscle cell. Once that gets taken inside, it stimulates release of calcium, and then we get muscle contraction. Well, botulinum toxin stops the acetylcholine from ever being released. So great, there's the action potential, but there's no release of this neurotransmitter. That leads to paralysis. So when it comes to, well, let me talk about the bacteria first. So the actual bacteria is something that you can get from contaminated food. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would always warn about checking my canned goods. When she was a kid, botulism was more of an issue, partly because of pasteurization and canning issues in the 40s and 50s. But you would check to make sure that your can didn't bulge any, or that the top of the can that was sealed didn't puff out. If you could push the lid up and down, in and out, that meant that your your food was tainted by this bacteria, and it caused pressure change by the gases it released. Anyway, so it was quite a concern, like I said, especially when my mom was a kid and before, because this is what it did. It would lead to paralysis and death if it was bad, because it could stop the muscles from for breathing, that required for breathing and circulation and all the different kind of essential life functions. So basically, that's the bacteria, that's the toxin, that's what the toxin can do. That's where you initially would find it. You can also find it in the soil. But then science took this and realized that it had uses in the cosmetic industry. And so botulinum toxin became Botox, shortened for this botulinum toxin. In small dilute amounts, it is injected into the fine muscles in the face because it paralyzes them. And paralyzing them prevents movement. So the lines and the wrinkles that people are concerned about getting, especially in the forehead and around the eyes, between the eyebrows, can be short-term smoothed by simply paralyzing the muscle. If you want to see something truly funny, I showed this in class once. There's a montage on YouTube of the Real Housewives crying. I love it. It's hilarious because if you watch it, you'll find that their faces don't move when they cry. That's one of the things that happens with Botox, is you have a hard time obviously moving muscles, and for people that do it a lot or in larger amounts, it really does paralyze the face, so that normal expressions like crying or smiling, things like that, can get paralyzed so that you don't see them. So Botox also has applications in migraine treatment. Certain types of migraines can be treated through Botox. So it does have a variety of other uses, both cosmetic and medicinal, that can be a benefit. But this is where it actually comes from. All right, that's the end of this lecture and the end of what we're doing this week. So I hope you enjoy your fall break, and I will talk to you soon.